Welcome to our presentation on validation theory. The group members are Jessica, Cynthia, Valerie, Natalie, and Stephanie. This presentation is going to go over validation theory background, the definition and framework, validation theory today, best practices and application, as well as activities to reinforce your learning, and the impact and significance. Our learning objectives are to understand background of validation theory and theorists, understand the inequitable social construction in higher education that undermines a student's view of their own academic potential, identify and apply validation theory framework to research and higher education practices, as well as synthesize and apply validation theory to your own research, leadership, and educational institution.
The history of validation theory. Dr. Laura Rendón developed validation theory, an asset-based student success framework that has been employed to frame research studies and programmatic activities in 2- and 4-year colleges and universities. To know the theory is to know the theorist. Rendón, who grew up in poverty in Texas during the 1960s, knows firsthand the hurdles that impoverished and culturally estranged students face in order to get to college. "I literally went from poverty to affluence," she said. "But I am an exception, and so my passion in life is to see that more students can fulfill their hopes and their dreams." She is a theorist, an activist, and a researcher. She is the co-director of the Center for Research and Policy in Education in the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Texas in San Antonio. She specializes in college preparation and retention of low-income and first-generation students, and has a passion for assisting students who grew up in poverty like her. The birth of validation theory. Laura Rendón was part of the Transition to College project in 1993. It was used to determine how student learning was affected by student involvement in academic and non-academic experiences in college. The project was to contrast college students who were white males from privileged backgrounds with students that challenged traditional values. She found that institutions and organizations favor traditional students using Euro-centered curriculum, emphasizing competition over collaboration, and focusing on learning outcomes over learning processes. The project assessed influences of students' out-of-class experiences in learning and retention, and it investigated how non-traditional students expecting to fail began to believe and be successful. Because of this project, Rendón discovered validation theory may be the missing link to success and involvement. This was in contrast to the work done by Vince Tinto in 1982. He stated that students must work to integrate into established educational format to succeed. The theory emerged from experiences of low-income, non-traditional students and places them in the center of the analysis. It was developed to help organizations become more aware of students struggling between their culture and institutional requirements, and to find solutions to help students increase their likelihood of graduating from college. Rendón realized past experiences and lessons learned outside of academia are a rich resource, and there's no need to give it up. She found that doubt about abilities was a major factor in success, and it was reinforced by humiliating experiences inside and outside of the classroom. In contrast, students performed better and had more confidence when they were valued as individuals. Non-traditional students are believed to have to choose between two worlds: the world in which they were raised, their culture, and the world of education, or the institutional practices. Rendón called this el choque, which means a crash between two worlds. Non-traditional students feel they must shed or mask their culture to be accepted, and are expected to assimilate into the culture provided by the institution. Because of this, they feel a separation from their past. There are many studies leading to validation theory. One study showed there was a belief that one had to be loyal to the academic culture, leaving behind their own culture to succeed. Students believe they must choose between two worlds: their own culture or the culture emphasized in education. Studies found that increased student involvement led to increased success. The theory was developed that students must integrate into school socially and academically to succeed. The myth that only white males could succeed in college was challenged, and there were studies that showed that external agents shaped student success. So validation theory was formed to challenge the idea that students needed to integrate into the values of institution and to support the idea of external agents assisting students with success.
Now we will take a look at the validation theory's framework. What is validation theory? Validation is defined as an enabling, confirming, and supportive process initiated by in- and out-of-class agents that foster academic and interpersonal development. Validation theory consists of 6 elements. The first element places the responsibility for initiating contact with students on institutional agents such as faculty, advisors, counselors, and coaches. Non-traditional students will likely find it difficult to navigate the world of college on their own. They will be unlikely to take advantage of tutoring services, faculty office hours, or even the library. They feel uncomfortable asking questions because they do not want to be viewed as stupid. The second element speaks to the notion that when validation is present, students feel capable of learning and have a sense of self-worth. Whomever the student turns to for validation, the affirming action should serve to confirm that the student brings knowledge to college and has the potential to succeed. The third element states that validation is a prerequisite for student development. In other words, when students are validated on a consistent basis, they are more likely to feel confident about themselves and their ability to learn and get involved in college life. The fourth element is that validation can occur in and out of the classroom through multiple agents like family, faculty, peers, counselors, and coaches. Validating agents actively affirm and support students on a consistent basis. The fifth element is that validation should not be viewed as an end, but rather as a developmental process which begins early on and continues over time. The more validation a student experiences in college will result in a more enriching college experience. The sixth and final element states that validation is most critical for non-traditional students when administered early in their college experience, especially important during their first few weeks of class and in their first year of college. There are 2 types of validation, academic and interpersonal, which can come from agents both in and out of the classroom. Academic validation fosters a student's confidence in his or her ability to learn in the higher education setting. Interpersonal validation encourages students' personal and social development. Academic validation occurs when in and out of class agents take action to assist students to trust their innate capacity to learn and acquire confidence in being a college student. An example of an in-class validating agent would be a professor who learns and addresses students by name. An example of an out-of-class validating agent would be receiving positive comments from peers, friends, or family members. Interpersonal validation occurs when in and out-of-class agents take action to foster students' personal development and social adjustment. An example of an in-class validating agent would be a professor who suggests that students form study groups outside of class and exchange contact information. And an example of an out-of-class validating agent would be having positive relationships with friends, family, or college staff.
So how is validation theory used today? Since Rendón published her article in 1994, validation theory has been studied and applied to various contexts and groups in higher education. We can see in this limited timeline of other scholarly applications of validation theory, researchers like Holmes in 2002 used this framework to better understand the experiences of African American students in predominantly white institutions and develop a model for positive learning experiences that can be adapted to meet the needs of other minority students in higher education. In that same year, Rendón also applied the framework to a special program on community college campuses. She studied the Puente Project, which is an asset-based cohort program with faculty serving as validating agents for first-generation Latinx students to increase their transfer rates. What these studies already conclude is that validation theory is beneficial for all students, but it is crucial often to those non-traditional students. This is when students feel validated and develop academic and social self-confidence that they persist in both retention and graduation rates. The theory continues to be studied and applied. In 2017, Musaeus and Saleu, professors of education studies at UC San Diego, they ground their study in the importance of campus environment and a sense of belonging, furthering the work to reject Tinto's integration theory. Looking at West and East Coast colleges, they built on the discussion of cultural validation to promote student success, presenting a culturally engaging campus environments model as a useful tool to build culturally validating campus environments. Costa, in 2017, takes a different approach. Instead of looking at the environments meeting students' need, they examine the validating agents and the role of professional development for professors. Costa recommends determining if faculty and staff are feeling validated or invalidated, as either feeling can directly impact students, while also recommending the assessment of decades-old policy and programming developed without a validation theory framework, and examining the culture of decision-making processes at the administration level, looking at things such as budgeting, committee reviews, and hiring practices. 23 years later, the work continues to emphasize examples of the structural changes needed for institutions to make versus the students. Finally, in 2020, our own Laverne EDD professor, Dr. Hallett, and his other research colleagues in a 5-year mixed method study use validation theory as a framework to further understand how to make higher education spaces more equitable with intentionally academically validating experiences for low-income students through comprehensive college transition programs at 4-year colleges. In particular, it reveals how the programs incorporate these 3 areas of support. 1, providing reinsurance. 2, allowing for multiple changes and chances. And 3, created space for vulnerability and risk-taking. Some of the limitations expressed in these studies here is that there needs to be more to be understood. Alcantar and Hernandez from their 2002 study expressed the need to study invalidating experiences as well as what makes a validating experience, and Musaeus acknowledges that further research should look at large sample sizes as well as different contexts. For us as leaders, validation theory is very important because we need to put the focus on the institutions, or in this case for validation theory, in higher education institutions, looking at the college, faculty, administrators, counselors, not the students, to find ways to make space for validating experiences. When leaders use Rendon's validation theory framework, all students benefit academically and socially, not just those historically excluded from higher education. Leaders need to start with a focus on the assets of non-traditional students bring to college, not a deficit approach. They need to help others in leadership positions to understand and apply validation theory. It is not about coddling our students. We do not need to fix these students. We need to fix the institutions, their policies, procedures, practices, which are set to regard and reward middle-class white students and not so much institutionalized validating experiences for our non-traditional students. One leader cannot do the work alone. We must be part of an ecology. This includes professional development trainings and a shift in the culture of decision-making policies and practices at the administrative level.
All right, let's look at how to apply validation theory to practice. Laura Rendón talks about some best practices and how we can foster student success. She talks about building a relationship with students, asking questions about their life and struggles, calling students by name, praising success, and emphasizing the importance of education for their families. She also says, don't assume all students know how to get involved and how to access campus information. University staff should take the first step in reaching out to assist students and helping them to get involved in campus life. You can introduce students to others in similar circumstances, and this way students can encourage other students to validate and support each other. Whenever possible, affirm students as being capable of college-level work. Indicate to students that what they know and the backgrounds they bring are as important as what others know and bring to college. All right, now we're going to talk about how we connect validation theory to some of our work in higher education. For me, in teaching freshman composition, I find that I often have to engage in work that repairs the trauma and invalidating experiences of previous writing classes. This trauma often presents as fear and avoidance. I assign an activity early on that asks students to reflect on a skill, any skill that they have mastered, and the process by which it took to master that skill. The students share these experiences about their success and resiliency with peers in the class. At the end of the activity, I draw comparisons of that success to their goals and path in writing and in college. This presents a valuable opportunity for the students to see their academic potential with writing and to validate it.
As an admissions counselor at the University of Laverne, I work with non-traditional students in the Campus Accelerated Program for Adults, CAPA, which is designed for working professionals 25 and older. That includes first-generation and minority students. The CAPA program makes students feel more comfortable by connecting them with other working professionals. We actively reach out and assist students with scheduling their advisement appointments and discuss the benefits of attending new student orientation. We also help them access the resources available to them early in their college career to ensure retention and degree completion. By validating these students early in the recruitment and advisement process, we're able to assist them in starting a successful journey to completing their degree.
In my position at UC Irvine, I work with many low-income, first-generation minority students, especially Hispanic and those that identify as dreamers. I have seen that validation from an advisement level, as well as a programmatic and resource level, is one of the most effective ways to engage with students and see them succeed. Students have come to me stating that they were going to drop the university, they could not afford to continue, or classes were just too hard due to their circumstances. But programs like the Dreamers Resource Center has helped students find success. We emphasize that they belong at UC Irvine.
In my classes, I try to offer opportunities for students to share their experiences in relation to the material we are covering through questions, discussions, and respectful debates. This helps them apply the material to their lives, but also to show that they have a valuable source of knowledge of their own to contribute to the class and material, validating the importance of their personal past in an educational setting.
Laura Rendón's validation theory has impacted special programs on college campuses, and the Puente Project is a community college program that works to eradicate exclusionary practices and policies that have restricted access to overturn years of educational neglect for first-generation working-class Latinx students. With faculties, counselors, and students acting as validating agents for both academic and interpersonal validation, the Puente program promotes access and learning communities, transforming non-traditional students into powerful learners, and creates in and out-of-class validating experiences that foster academic success and personal growth. It models the successful application of validation theory as intentional, proactive, and systematic, and was studied by Laura Rendón herself.
As we continue on this journey of leadership and earning our doctorate, here are some activities you can do with your students or within your own organization to practice this idea of validation theory. These are activities that are meant for before, during, or after scenarios, as well as some reflective homework. A couple important points before we begin. Remember that professor-student dynamic is essential and should always be a validating point in a student's higher education journey. Elements such as support, ensuring their capabilities, ensuring they are valued, and confirmation of them being there as a student is vital to their success. Who they are will ultimately make them successful as a student. Validation is critical to that experience, inside and outside the classroom. And they too can become proponents of positive validation theory concepts through their own relationships with others. Our first activity, what I need to learn. This is a pre-class, pre-lecture activity. As a professor, you will send a form to the scheduled class with 3 specific questions. Something you already know about the subject, something you want to learn about the subject, and something that could happen in this class that would make it possible to learn what you need to learn. Before the scheduled class, collect the forms and review the items that they wrote to be discussed. In the class, but before the lecture, respond with statements of validation to the class and individual students, that they are heard, that you understand what they want to learn, and that you will ensure that they will learn what they are requesting, making them a more academically aware student and environment. Respond with continued positive validation on the forms or verbally to the class, that what you will do as a professor to better their experience and ensure they can work with you if they have questions or comments or thoughts to ensure their success to be supportive. Reaffirm their capabilities of being in the class overall, and continue to allow for that open, honest communication. Our second activity, sharing my trepidations. This is the in-class pre-lecture activity. In pairs or small groups, have the students share those trepidations on anything in general within the class or the course or within their higher education experience. Have them within the pairs and small groups continue to share with the class what they consider to be their most significant concern or fear. As each pair or small group shares, follow up with validation that they are meant to be here, they are heard, and that as a professor, you will do whatever it is needed to quell those fears or concerns by working with them, including finding resources they need through their educational experience. Address any additional concerns as needed, even after the activity is done. Our third activity, I am unique. This is an in-class during lecture activity. Ask each student to share one thing that makes them unique as a student, specifically in higher education. After each individual responds, respond with the validation statement back to the student about how that uniqueness will make them thrive and become successful throughout their journey. Tell them to write down that unique element. Place it somewhere that they can always revert back to, including carrying it all the way through graduation and when they accept that diploma. Our culminating activity, the activity debrief. This is the in-class end of lecture activity. Ask the students their initial thoughts on the activities, insight they had, what they would do different. Feedback is always excellent to have. Ask what they believe the value of these activities were and why they did it. As a professor or leader, make sure to follow up on your rationale for doing these activities. At the end of the debrief, revalidate their thoughts and shared experiences through them. Reinforce that their fellow students are valuable resources throughout their entire education, as well as mentors and yourself. We will now take a few moments to talk about the significance of validation theory, as well as a few final thoughts before we wrap up. Validation theory is not only of utmost importance, but is critical to the success of our students. Remember, it is not coddling our students. It is generally validating experience to help underserved students. We want them to believe that they can do it because they can. We want them to believe in an inherent capacity to learn and feel excited about learning. We want them to feel a part of the learning community and become motivated and driven. We want them to feel cared about as a person and not just as a student. It is a full 360. And now for some final thoughts. Some assumptions of validation theory. It works with students as whole human beings. Attention to intellectual, social, emotional, and inner life aspects of human development. It is asset-based. It is rooted in the experiences of low-income, first-generation students, and it works to promote equitable outcomes and to promote inclusive classrooms. It makes students academically and personally stronger, and it shifts the role of the institution from passive to active. Here are some additional references to guide your continued learning on validation theory. Thank you very much for taking the time to learn about validation theory with us, especially in higher education.